What is up, you guys? Diggerdan here, coming at you with another video. Today, I'm doing a book review on Children of Dune, written by Frank Herbert. So without further ado, let's dig into it. Now, for those of you who don't know, or just friendly reminder, Children of Dune is book number 3 in the Dune saga. The first 6 books that Frank Herbert actually wrote himself, and then book that follows with Brian Herbert, Frank's son. Him and another author wrote some books in the Dune universe. So, with having said that, in my non-spoiler section for Children of Dune, there's most likely going to be spoilers for the first 2 books. So if you don't want any spoilers for Dune anything, I would click off now. But for everyone else who doesn't mind spoilers for the first 2 books, let's keep going. So this was my favorite of the 3 books. I'll just come out and say it right away. Book 1, Dune, I rated as a 9.04. Book 2, Dune Messiah, I rated as an 8.94. So just 1/10 of a point difference. And then Children of Dune, overall, I rated as a 9.28. So significantly higher than the other 2. But that's not to say the other aren't bad books. They're still phenomenal books. For me, 8 and 9 is very high. In my opinion, at least for my ratings personally, anything over a 5 is something I dig or I like. And anything below a 5 is something I bury and actively dislike and would steer away. So Children of Dune was phenomenal. And I'll talk about this in detail later, but it would be higher if it probably could be a 10 out of 10 for me if I feel like I wasn't missing things and I feel like if I caught everything that was going on. Like maybe on a reread when I'm like 10 years and like much smarter, I feel like I could see this as a 10 out of 10, but it's still a very strong book overall. Now, as a friendly reminder, this, like I said, takes place after the first 2 books. In the first book, that's where we are, where we as readers enter the world of Arrakis, or the world of Dune, and see the conflict between the Atreides family and the Harkonnens, and just kind of this is the Empire as a whole. We meet the Fremen. We understand what the spice is. We sort of meet the guild a little bit, and then we see Paul Atreides, his rise in power through the Fremen people and through the Fremen religion. And then in Dune Messiah, he's at the end of the first book of Dune, he's crowned emperor. And then Dune Messiah, it's a few years after, I forget how many years, I think it's like 12 years after the events of the first book, and then where he's emperor of the entire empire, and then his Fremen jihad is wreaking havoc, or has wreaked havoc across the empire, cementing his rule as emperor. And then at the end of that book, he walks in the desert because he gets blind because of an atomics attack. And so we can see he's presumed dead, or dies in the desert at the end of book 2. Now, I know that's a gross oversimplification of the first 2 books' plot, but Frank Herbert, he writes dense worlds and plot that if I went into everything, that'd be a completely different video. So I'm just saying, at the beginning of this novel, without spoilers, we explore Leto II, Paul's son, and then Ghanima, Paul's daughter. So yeah, they're under the rule of Alia, who's like acting emperor or empress, or the advisor. I forget exactly her title. But then also under Stilgar, who is one of the most trusted Fremen around. He's like a chieftain or a naib. I forget exactly the word for it. And so that's the setting of the first story without going into spoilers. So in the story, like I said, it follows Leto and Ghanima. I forget what they're actually, like, their official, unofficial name is, but they have gained consciousness basically before birth, very similar to Alia, where she has memories of all these different lives of Ben Gesserit, just like her mother Jessica. But so Leto and Ghanima have something similar, but with all of their entire descendants, like all their ancestors. So they have generations upon generations of wealth of knowledge to pull from. And in the story, they're only 9 years old. So this book takes place 9 years after the events of book 2. So with all of the setting in place, let's talk about some things I liked and some things I didn't like. Like I said, overall, this is a 9.28, and I liked it very much. It continued the world building of Arrakis and really of the Empire a little bit more. We see more of the family Corrino, where Irulan, Princess Irulan, her family's from. We unlock another Fremen secret or backstory stuff with the Forbidden City of Jakaruttu, or kind of the cursed city that has like taboo around it. Things like that, which I really appreciate and can enjoy. But also, this book, I was confused a lot of times, but I just kept going with it, and then there were seeds being planted that I didn't really understand, and then later they started to get paid off. I'm like, okay, I understand what's going on now, finally. So that's something I would say throughout the first 3 books of Dune. If you're not 100% with it, or if you're confused, just keep going, unless it's like really hard for you to get through. Just keep going because it will make sense by the end. And that's another case with Children of Dune. But to be fair, I would say out of the 3 books, this one is probably the one that confused me the most. But also, I think it had the biggest payoff at the end. So I think the investment is higher, and it's worth it. A joke I had in my head by the time I finished this book is that I felt like I have a master's in psychology, or sociology, or philosophy, by reading this book, because there's so like dense, especially with philosophy. Like especially with Leto and like Stilgar, there's just so many different proofs, like philosophy proofs, in there. It's crazy. I've only taken one philosophy class in college, and I actually enjoyed it, but that wasn't my focus. My focus was business. So I took a lot of business classes, so I kind of missed some of the not critical thinking stuff, but the meaning of life type question classes, you know? So, and I feel like I revisited some of that in Children of Dune, which is kind of fun. So that's really all I'm going to talk about, spoiler free. I feel like I'm kind of dancing around spoilers, and it's just easier for me to just talk about specifics with spoilers. So if you don't want any spoilers for book 3, I would click off now. And for everyone else, let's keep digging into it. So the way I get my rating out of 10 is that there's 5 categories I rate, each one of those through 10, and then I take an average of those 5 categories. So the first category I like to rate is emotional impact. An emotional impact I rated is a 9.5. So it was very, very high. It's the second highest thing I rated out of the 5. And the reason it is so high, it started maybe a little lower, just because there was some confusion going on about the plot, like I was saying. But like I said, the payoff at the end is stupendous. And even when Alia is kind of flirting with the whole abomination thing, and then later Lord Baron Harkonnen kind of weasels his way into her brain, or her mind, and she lets it happen, or she doesn't really put up much of a resistance. Like, that kind of blew my mind. Like, oh my goodness, that's crazy. Like, I understand why the Bene Gesserit are so afraid of abomination, and why the Fremen see her as possessed, or can see her as possessed, like they do at the very end. And then also the idea of, like I said, at the end of book 2, Paul is blinded, and just because of Fremen custom, like, blind men aren't worth much, I guess. So they just go in the desert and are presumed dead. So at the end of book 2, it was kind of a gut punch, like, oh no, Paul, come on, dude. But also, in fiction, books, movies, fiction in general, if you don't see a body, if you don't see the person physically die and perish, or get buried or get cremated or whatever, there's always a small glimmer of hope that they're still alive. And that's the case with Paul, where, again, big spoilers, he does come back as the preacher, where he doesn't have the mantle of Paul Muad'Dib Atreides, or as Emperor of the Empire. He's just the preacher, because the world, the Empire can't handle him as Paul Atreides. And that's really where Leto and Ghanima have to step up, because they're the heirs of the Empire. Or they're the Children of Dune, right? So it focuses on them. I wish it would have focused on Alia, like her internal battle with the Baron Harkonnen, Vladimir Harkonnen, a little bit more, because we kind of saw it a little bit. She resisted a little bit when he first kind of weaseled his way into her thoughts, but then he overcame her, and then we don't really see or hear from him again, aside from a couple little scenes until the very end when she's about to commit suicide to just make it end, after Leto comes back after his metamorphosis with the sand trout, and so he has these huge big powers and all these things. So there's a lot of high emotions in play, and that, again, what I just described is only scratching the surface of the things that happened. Then you have Duncan Idaho with Stilgar at the end, like kind of in the second act. He basically sacrifices himself and forces Stilgar to kill Duncan Idaho. That way, Alia would go after Stilgar and basically force him and Ghanima into hiding. And like and so Idaho sacrificing himself the second time for the Atreides family is just gut wrenching. And he seems like dead now. I don't think he's be able to come back again like he did in book 2. And Gurney Halleck, like, I had that connection with him in the first book. He was one of my favorite characters. We didn't see him in book 2 because he was with Jessica on the Atreides home planet, Caladan, I think is what it's called. And now he's back with Jessica on Dune. And he was kind of a little whiny boy this book. I didn't really care for Gurney as much. But to be fair, he was only doing what he felt he had to do, or he was just following orders from Jessica. And then when Jessica was training Ferretin on the Corrino homeworld, or the family Corrino homeworld, like, you don't really know what angle she's playing at, like, why is she training Ferretin, all these things. So in my mind, there's a lot of big things at stake, and there's a lot of big payoffs. So that's why emotional impact is so high. And then at that climax, after, like I said, when Leto, or even before, when Leto and Paul go to Arakian, I think that's the capital city, and then the preacher, or Paul, is starting to condemn Alia, and and then she sends out 5 of her priests, and you know something bad's gonna happen. And then when Paul gets stabbed by one of the priests, and then the crowd like disperse, and they're afraid, and then you just see him stabbed, and sprawled out on the stairs, and it's like, no, Paul, we just got you back. So that's how I, as a reader, felt, but I'm sure that's also how the Fremen people felt too. So I feel like we had that connection. And then in the very next scene, Leto busts down the door with Ghanima in his arm, and basically to kick out Alia. He wants to try to save her, but at this point he knows he can't. He's just got to kind of cut the issue off at the head, So, and then also with the plan paying off, with him saying the secret words that reactivate Ghanima's memory of Leto not actually dying, and yeah, just it played beautifully. And then kind of being in Jessica's head and even Ferretin's head, and them watching all this play out, and they don't really know what's happening, and Jessica kind of feels like she got played like a fiddle by Leto and the twins in general. And then it's just gut-wrenching, seeing Alia getting called out as Abomination, and just her speaking in different tongues, basically, in different voices, just proving that she's possessed. And then when she finally jumps out the window and commits herself, to just end it, because that's really the best thing that she could do. That was just gut-wrenching. So yeah, 9.5. Next is characters. I like to rate. I rated characters is a 9.2 out of 10. Again, very high. You can see the way I'm talking about a lot of these characters. I feel very connected to them. And we even get to see new characters like Ferretin, Corrino, even his mom. I forget her name. She gets banished by Ferretin pretty early in the story. So we don't really explore her too much. But we do, I forget his name. I think Technique or Tech or something like that. Ferretin's Sakuru, whatever, his basically advisor and bodyguard. He was a little interesting. We got to get to see a little bit more in that Sakuru, I forget how to say it. but kind of in that mindset, like that warrior tribe mindset a little bit. And him just trying to kind of being caught in the middle between his orders from Ferretin's mother, but also Ferretin, who becomes the head of the Corrino household, and just kind of that duology a little bit going on. So some of the new characters we see are interesting. Even some of the new Fremen, like that we meet at Jakarutu, I think is how you say it, that are kind of basically putting Leto on trial a little bit, or on blast, and trying to, it's showing that trying to train him by orders of Jessica, but later it shows that no, not actually under Jessica, it's under Alia, and Leah's trying to get him killed. So a lot of things going on. That's maybe more plot, but some of those characters that we meet in those scenes I think are interesting, and just remind you, hey, this is what a true Fremen looks like, going from the old ways, even though they're like cast outs. And again, just Jessica's whole thing, you don't really know what angle she's playing at. And something I did say in my last review for Dune Messiah is that I actually missed Jessica, so we get to see her back in Children of Dune. I thought it was great. With the twins, with Leto and Ghanima, the story focuses more on Leto. I'm sorry, however you want to say it. It's Leto, you know. So if you get annoyed at me saying it differently, I'm sorry. I say it differently back to back even. So with Leto, we focus more on him and not so much as on Ghanima. And I think for story-wise it makes sense, just because Leto is the one that goes through the metamorphosis. He's the one that's out on his own, really trying to figure out where the golden path really takes him, where Ghanima is basically under house arrest from Alia, or on the run from Alia, just trying to survive. In this whole time, she thinks that Leto is dead, and she just wants to take Ferretin, Corrino, out because she blames him. And so all these things. So anyway, I like both of them, but I feel like I like Leto more just because we probably got to spend more time with him, and he seems like a more dynamic character, where Ghanima, she still seems very dynamic, but we don't get to see as much of her. There wasn't as much development with her just because we didn't spend as much time. Again, so like I said, in emotional impact section, is that I wish we got to see more of Alia going back and forth with Baron Harkonnen, or maybe even with some of the other voices, some of the other ancestors, kind of trying to take, like, because we see that in some of her actions, like she's not an Atreides anymore. We know that she does things that an Atreides woman wouldn't do, or family member of the Atreides wouldn't do. So we know it's somebody, and we can assume it's the Baron Harkonnen. But also at the end, when she's fully possessed, there's a bunch of different voices that are coming out. So I just think, unless that's not the case, unless it really was Baron Harkonnen the entire time, but then I just wish we would could have seen a little bit more of that to just confirm that. But really, that's one of my only complaints. And then, like I said, Gurney, he was just doing what he was told, but I didn't like him as much in this one as I did in just the first Dune. The plot, I rate it as a 9 out of 10. Now again, very high, but it could have been higher if I maybe wasn't confused about what was going to happen. And maybe on a reread again, like I said, it would probably be higher because I'll know what's going to happen, or at least I'll understand it better than I did on the first read. But kind of like the first two books, I didn't really know what was going to happen. For me, it kind of just felt like exploring the world. But with it being the third book, the world is pretty much established, and now it feels like we're kind of exploring the philosophy of the Empire a little bit, kind of the philosophy of Fremen, the philosophy of the Atreides family. But when big moments did happen, like when Leto, who's just tripped out on spice, he goes to the pool of sand trout, and he like takes one and clings it to himself, and he's got a chain of a bunch of different sand trout, and he like gets this metamorphosis, basically, or not quite metamorphosis, that's hinted that'll be later, but he's not human anymore. It's his skin that's not his own. Like that, like big moments like that are crazy. And then again with like the preacher really being Paul, it's kind of hinted throughout, and then it's confirmed that it is Paul. I feel like, in my opinion, the first real confirmation that it's Paul is when he tells Alia. So, like, I forget exactly what happens, but Alia, he's preaching, and Alia is very close to him, and then as he's about to leave her at the end of the chapter, him preaching, he looks right at her. His eye sockets look right at her. He's like, "Isn't that right, sister?" Or something like that, to that effect. I know he does say sister, and then Alia's like, "Oh shit," he knows he's still alive. And then that was about halfway through the book, so that's when it's like, "Yeah, Paul." But then he's right. Paul is right, where it's like the world doesn't need a Paul Atreides. The world doesn't need Muad'Dib. The world doesn't need Paul Atreides as emperor. Like, been there, done that. Like, I ruined it. I screwed up. So yeah, plot pretty solid. Now dialogue and prose, solid 9. Again, it could be higher, but I feel like there were some things again that I missed, or maybe quite didn't understand. And again, with Frank Herbert, there is a payoff if you kind of stick with it, internalize some stuff. It will be explained later. If not in this book, probably the next. But again, like I say in most of these science fiction fantasy reviews, there's always going to be words that are kind of silly in outside of the context of the book. But for the most part, big picture stuff, I wasn't really terribly confused about what was going on. Sometimes Frank Herbert likes to not have, like, if there's dialogue back and forth, not all the time. It's just going to have the quotes. It's not always going to have said Leto, said Stilgar. So that's more on me as a reader, maybe just losing track who's going back and forth. But if I did lose track, it was usually in those sections where it didn't explicitly say, Leto said this, Stilgar replied with this. It would just be like text. But again, that's more probably my fault. And a little bit, too, with Prose, just complain a little bit, is that, like I said, I felt like I have a master's in like sociology or philosophy from reading this, because I feel like a lot of the prose, some of the things that were said, was almost like a metaphor of a metaphor. So it's like these really big brain, really up in the air thoughts and ideas that I really quite didn't understand 100%. And I think that just kind of came across in the way it was written. Alright, now last thing I'd like to rate is world building, and I rate world building as a 9.7, which, like I said, is the highest thing. Again, 9.7 out of 10. Just the world building for the entire series is just crazy high. Some of my favorite. I would say only second to like Wheel of Time. But for sci-fi, this is phenomenal. And like I said, there's a lot of things that we got to see and explore, like Jacurutu, and like Leto's new powers now that he has the skin that's not his own. In like the whole abomination bit, and like having the voices in Alia's head. And really, they're in Leto's and Ghanima's head as well, but they fought against it. They fought past that. It's just so good. Like the whole preacher bit, him, and even the Fremen that live in Jacurutu, and how they're cast out Fremen who are outside of normal Fremen society, and how they are more ruthless with water. Where even travelers who aren't going to be missed, they'll take them, sacrifice them, and then steal their water. And they're just more just more crazy things. Like I said, we got to see more of the Corrino family. Set up Ferrodin to be Ghanima's spouse, or not spouse, excuse me, mate. She's gonna marry. It's set up that she's gonna marry Leto, but at the beginning of the book, they said that's not what we were gonna do. So I kind of went against their own word, but I guess the plot changes, so things change, right? So we got to see some more like the wildlife. Like Dune is turning into a more green planet, which kind of sets off a lot of these issues, because the desert is getting smaller, so that means a lot of the worms are dying off, which means the spice production is going down, and there's actual like rainstorms that are happening on Arrakis, and it's kind of like putting the Fremen in like almost a conniption. Like they're like, our world is changing. What's happening to our friend the desert? So I would say that kind of boils down what the big plot is the world of Arrakis is changing, and these are the things that happen out of a reaction to that change. So I'm just excited to see what happens in book number 4. I think God Emperor of Dune is what it is. And just see how Arrakis has changed more, if it does. I'm assuming it does. And see how the characters change. Because I'm assuming Frank Herbert likes to have a time jump. I think from 1 to 2, it was 12 years, and then from 2 to 3 it was 9 years. So I'm curious to see if that trend continues from 12 to 9, and then it would be what, 7 years, 8 years, or 6 years, different. But we'll see. I'm really interested to see what happens next. I have really no predictions. Sometimes as the series continues, sometimes I like to throw in predictions. I really have no idea where the world or what the story is going to take place next. Like, I have no idea. I'm sure it's going to follow Leto's metamorphosis a little bit, him being less and less human and more of otherworldly, or more worm-like, I guess. Probably follow Faradin's relationship with Ghanima, how they're mates, maybe lovers now, like actually love each other. Probably see how the Empire, or like how the Empire reacts to the Atreides family, like with the twins marrying, with incest, but is it really because he's not mating her? Weird stuff. I hope Jessica makes an appearance again. I'd be sad to see that she leaves, but we'll see. And maybe Crazy Dune or Crazy Duncan Idaho come back, but I highly doubt it. He already came back once. Yeah. So anyway, that is my review. Like I said, overall 9.26. I love this book. I'm excited to jump into book 4. But I'm a little apprehensive just because a lot of people said that it kind of falls off later in the series. But we'll see. So this is May. I read this. I'll read the next one in June, and then the following in July, and the following in August is currently how I will do it. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, please hit like down below. You guys want to see more from me, Diggerdan, please hit that subscribe button as well as that bell notification icon so you guys know when I upload each and every single time. And I'll see you fools in the next one. Thanks for watching.